The scorching sun beat down on the dusty town of Redemption Creek, Wyoming territory, as 26-year-old Zara Abbott stood trembling on the auction block, her cheeks stained with tears and her heart shattered beyond repair. It was 1878, and the life she had known just 3 months ago, a life of modest comfort as the wife of a hard-working homesteader, had vanished with her husband's final breath, leaving nothing but debts and sorrow in its wake. $5. Do I hear 10 for this fine woman? She can cook, clean, and tend a garden better than most. The auctioneer bellowed, his voice carrying across the crowd of rough-looking men who had gathered in the town square. Most were ranchers looking for a housekeeper, some were businessmen seeking cheap labor, and others, the ones with predatory eyes that made Zara's skin crawl, had intentions far more sinister. $10. Shouted a portly man with yellowed teeth and breath that reeked of whiskey even from 20 feet away. 15, countered another, a rancher with calloused hands and a cruel twist to his mouth. Zara closed her eyes, unable to bear the humiliation as men bid for her as if she were cattle. When Thomas Abbott had succumbed to pneumonia after that terrible winter storm, she discovered that her beloved husband had mortgaged everything they owned to keep their small farm afloat during the drought. The bank had taken it all: the land, the house, even Thomas's prized horses. With no family in the territory and nowhere to turn, the law had determined that she would be sold into servitude to pay off the remaining debts. $25. The bid came from a gray-haired man whose reputation as a harsh employer was well known throughout the county. The auctioneer grinned, his gold tooth catching the sunlight. $25 for the widow Abbott. Do I hear 30? $100. The crowd fell silent, heads turning toward the source of the voice. A tall figure stood at the back, his face partially shadowed by the brim of a black Stetson. He stepped forward, and the crowd parted like water before him. Zara had seen him around town before everyone knew of Colton Prescott, the owner of the largest cattle ranch in the territory. He was as mysterious as he was wealthy, a man of few words but decisive action. Some said he'd fought for the Union in the war, others claimed he'd been a gunslinger before settling in Wyoming. All agreed on one thing: he was not a man to be trifled with. "Did you say $100, Mr. Prescott?" the auctioneer asked, his surprise evident. "I did." Prescott's voice was deep and steady as he moved closer to the auction block. His eyes, a striking shade of blue beneath the shadow of his hat, fixed on Zara with an intensity that made her breath catch. "Well then, do I hear 105? The auctioneer looked around hopefully, but the other bidders shook their heads. None could or would challenge Prescott. $100 going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Colton Prescott. The crowd began to disperse, murmuring in disappointment or relief. Prescott approached the block, pulling a leather pouch from his vest pocket and counting out the money for the banker who stood nearby, greedily awaiting payment. When the transaction was complete, he looked up at Zara, who stood frozen, her hands clutched tightly together. Her wedding band, the last possession she'd been allowed to keep glinting in the sunlight. "Come down from there, Mrs. Abbott," Prescott said, offering his hand to help her descend the wooden steps. Zara hesitated, then placed her trembling hand in his. His palm was warm and rough with calluses, his grip gentle but firm as he guided her down. Once on solid ground, she tried to compose herself, wiping away tears with the back of her hand. "Mr. Prescott, she's mine forever," he announced loudly, cutting her off and ensuring everyone in earshot could hear. Then, leaning closer so only she could hear, he added, "But only if that's what you wish, Mrs. Abbott. I have a proposition for you, but not here. My wagon is this way." Confused but with no alternative, Zara followed him across the dusty street to where a wagon stood waiting, the Lazy P brand visible on its side. A young ranch hand sat at the reins, tipping his hat respectfully as they approached. Prescott helped her onto the bench seat before climbing up beside her. "To the ranch, Jimmy," he instructed the driver, who clicked to the horses. As the wagon pulled away from town, Zara found her voice. "Mr. Prescott, I don't understand. Why did you pay such a sum for me?" He studied her for a moment, his expression unreadable. "Because no person should be sold like property. What happened to you today was wrong. But the debt is settled now," he said firmly, "and you're not obligated to me for anything." Zara stared at him in disbelief. "Then why did you say—" "What you said, that I'm yours forever." A hint of a smile touched his lips. "To keep the vultures away. Some of those men wouldn't have respected a simple business arrangement. They needed to believe you're under my protection." "And am I," she asked cautiously, "under your protection?" "If you choose to be." He adjusted his hat, squinting at the horizon. "My sister, Margaret, runs the household at the Lazy P. She's been looking for someone to assist with cooking, cleaning, and managing the domestic affairs of the ranch. It's honest work with fair pay. You'd have your own room in the main house and Sundays off." Zara couldn't quite believe what she was hearing. "You're offering me employment, not servitude?" "Employment," he confirmed, "with wages that will allow you to save something for your future. In time, you could have enough to start over somewhere else, if that's what you want." The kindness of his offer nearly undid her composure again. After weeks of desperate uncertainty and the humiliation of the auction block, the simple dignity of paid employment seemed almost too good to be true. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" she asked, unable to hide her suspicion. Prescott was quiet for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the road ahead. "I know what it means to lose everything," he finally said, "and I know the value of being given a second chance." The wagon rumbled over the uneven road, taking them farther from town and closer to whatever future awaited Zara at the Lazy P Ranch. She studied Colton Prescott's profile, the strong jaw shadowed with stubble, the straight nose, the lines at the corners of his eyes that suggested he was somewhere in his mid-30s. There was something reassuring about his solid presence beside her, though she knew better than to trust too easily. "I accept your offer, Mr. Prescott," she said at last, "and I'll work hard to earn my keep." He nodded, seeming satisfied. "That's all I ask." The journey continued in companionable silence as the town of Redemption Creek fell away behind them. For the first time since Thomas's death, Zara felt a small flicker of hope. She had no way of knowing that this day, the day she stood on an auction block in tears and was claimed by a cowboy with unexpected kindness in his eyes, would change the course of her life forever. The Lazy P Ranch sprawled across 5,000 acres of Wyoming territory, a kingdom of grass and sky nestled between rolling hills and a crystal-clear river. As the wagon crested the final rise, Zara caught her first glimpse of her new home, and despite her circumstances, she couldn't help but be impressed. The main house was larger than she had expected, a two-story structure of solid timber with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several outbuildings dotted the property: a bunkhouse, stables, a blacksmith's forge, and what appeared to be a cookhouse. In the distance, cattle grazed peacefully on the verdant spring grass, tended by cowboys on horseback. "It's beautiful," she said softly. Colton nodded, a hint of pride in his expression. "Took 10 years to build it to what you see now. Started with nothing but a claim stake and 100 head of cattle." As they approached, a woman emerged from the main house, shading her eyes against the sun. She was tall and straight-backed, with dark hair streaked with silver pulled into a practical bun. When the wagon rolled to a stop in the yard, she approached with brisk steps. "You're back early, Cole," she said, her gaze moving curiously to Zara. "And with company, I see." Colton jumped down from the wagon and offered his hand to help Zara descend. "Margaret, this is Mrs. Zara Abbott. Mrs. Abbott, my sister, Margaret Prescott." Margaret's eyebrows rose slightly, but her expression remained polite. "Mrs. Abbott, welcome to the Lazy P." "Thank you, Miss Prescott," Zara replied, straightening her worn dress and wishing she looked more presentable. "Mrs. Abbott will be joining our household staff," Colton explained, with a look at his sister that suggested there was more to the story. "She's an experienced homemaker and will be assisting you with the running of the house." Margaret's shrewd eyes took in Zara's tear-stained face and the dust of the auction block still clinging to her skirts. Understanding dawned in her expression, followed by a softening of her features. "Well, you've arrived just in time. With the spring roundup starting next week, we'll have 20 extra hands to feed," Margaret said, taking charge of the situation with practiced ease. "Come inside, Mrs. Abbott. You must be tired from your journey. We'll get you settled and then discuss your duties." Colton cleared his throat. "I've some business to attend to in the south pasture. I'll leave Mrs. Abbott in your capable hands, Maggie." With a tip of his hat to Zara, he turned and strode toward the stables, calling for one of the ranch hands to saddle his horse. Margaret watched him go with a knowing look before turning back to Zara. "My brother doesn't usually involve himself in household matters," she observed. "There must be something special about you, Mrs. Abbott." "Nothing special," Zara said quickly. "He was simply being kind when kindness was desperately needed." Margaret studied her for a moment longer, then nodded. "Well, come along. Let's get you out of this heat." The interior of the ranch house was cool and inviting, with polished wooden floors and sturdy, comfortable furniture. Margaret led Zara up a staircase to the second floor, where a hallway branched off in 2 directions. "The family rooms are in the east wing," Margaret explained. "Colton's quarters, mine, and 2 guest rooms. The west wing houses rooms for the household staff. You'll be here." She opened a door to reveal a small but pleasant bedroom with a narrow bed, a dresser, a washstand, and a window overlooking the ranch yard. "It's lovely," Zara said, genuinely pleased. After fearing she would end up sleeping in some rancher's barn or worse, this private room felt like a luxury. "There's a washroom at the end of the hall that you'll share with Esther, our cook, and Beatrice, who helps with the laundry and cleaning," Margaret continued. "Meals are served in the kitchen for staff, though sometimes we all eat together in the dining room, especially during roundup or when we have guests." She moved to the dresser and opened a drawer, revealing several simple but well-made dresses. "These may fit you until you can get some things of your own. They belong to our previous housekeeper who left to get married last fall." Zara's eyes welled with tears at this unexpected kindness. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." Margaret's expression softened further. "Say you'll join us for supper once you've had a chance to rest and freshen up. The bathroom is stocked with soap and towels, and there should be hot water in the copper boiler." After Margaret left, Zara sank onto the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself to process everything that had happened. This morning, she had awakened in the town jail where she'd been held until the auction. Now, just hours later, she was in a comfortable room on a prosperous ranch, with the promise of honest work and fair treatment. She removed her wedding band, turning it over in her palm. "Oh, Thomas," she whispered, "I'm trying to be brave just like you always said I was." After allowing herself a few minutes of reflection, Zara set about making herself presentable. The washroom was indeed well appointed, and the warm bath she drew was her first in weeks. She washed away the dust and humiliation of the auction block, scrubbing until her skin was pink and tingling. One of the dresses in the dresser, a simple blue cotton with white piping, fit her reasonably well, though it was a bit loose around the waist. Zara had always been slender, but grief and inadequate food during her weeks of uncertainty had left her thinner than usual. She brushed out her long auburn hair, which had been her pride before Thomas's death left her with more pressing concerns than maintaining her appearance. After braiding it and pinning it up in a neat coronet, she examined herself in the small mirror above the washstand. The face that looked back at her was still recognizable, the same green eyes, the same sprinkle of freckles across her nose, but there was a new wariness in her expression, a hard-won wisdom that hadn't been there before. "You survived," she told her reflection. "Now it's time to rebuild." When Zara made her way downstairs, following the sounds and smells of meal preparation, she found the kitchen bustling with activity. A round-faced woman with rosy cheeks was kneading dough at a large table, while a younger woman stirred something fragrant in a pot on the massive iron stove. "There she is," the older woman exclaimed. "Miss Margaret said we had a new addition. I'm Esther Campbell, cook and mother hen to this entire operation." She wiped her floury hands on her apron and extended one to Zara. "And this is Beatrice Flynn, my right hand." Beatrice, who couldn't have been more than 18, gave a shy smile and a nod before returning her attention to her pot. "I'm Zara Abbott," she replied, shaking Esther's hand. "Miss Prescott said I might be able to help with supper preparations." "Indeed you can," Esther said cheerfully. "We're feeding the entire crew tonight. Colton likes to have everyone together before roundup begins. Can you handle a knife? Those carrots won't chop themselves." For the next hour, Zara lost herself in the familiar rhythms of kitchen work. There was something comforting about the simple tasks: chopping vegetables, kneading bread, stirring sauces. It reminded her of happier times, cooking for Thomas in their small but cozy cabin. As they worked, Esther kept up a steady stream of chatter, filling Zara in on the ranch and its inhabitants. She learned that Colton Prescott had indeed fought in the war, serving as a captain in the Union cavalry. He'd come west afterward, like so many restless souls, and had built the Lazy P from nothing through hard work and shrewd business sense. "Never married, though not for lack of opportunities," Esther confided, lowering her voice even though they were alone in the kitchen, Beatrice having been sent to set the tables in the dining room. "Half the eligible women in the territory have set their caps for him, but he keeps to himself mostly. Some say he left a sweetheart back east. Others think he's married to this ranch and has no room in his heart for a wife." Zara nodded politely, not particularly interested in Colton Prescott's romantic history. Her own heart was still raw with grief, and the idea of romance seemed as distant as the stars. "And how did you come to be here, Mrs. Abbott?" Esther asked, curiosity evident in her tone. "Not many young widows find themselves at the Lazy P." Zara hesitated, unsure how much to share. "My husband died this past winter," she said finally. "There were debts I couldn't pay. Mr. Prescott offered me employment when I had nowhere else to turn." Esther clucked sympathetically. "That sounds like him. For all his gruff ways, the man has a good heart. You'll be treated fairly here, Mrs. Abbott. The Prescotts run a decent house." The kitchen door swung open and Margaret entered, now wearing a fresh dress, her hair neatly arranged. "Everything smells wonderful, Esther. The men are washing up now. We'll be ready to serve in 10 minutes. She turned to Zara with an approving nod. "You look much refreshed, Mrs. Abbott. I hope you found everything satisfactory so far." "Very much so, Miss Prescott. And please call me Zara." "Then you must call me Margaret, at least when it's just the household staff present." she replied with a small smile. "We're not overly formal here, except when circumstances require it." The dining room of the Lazy Pea could accommodate up to 30 people at its massive oak table. Tonight, it was filled to capacity with ranch hands, all freshly scrubbed and in their cleanest shirts. They stood awkwardly behind their chairs, waiting for the boss to arrive before sitting. Zara helped Beatrice bring out platters of roast beef, bowls of vegetables, and baskets of fresh bread. The men watched hungrily but maintained their manners, nodding respectfully when introduced to Mrs. Abbott, our new housekeeper. The door opened, and Colton entered, also freshly changed into clean clothes, dark trousers, a crisp white shirt, and a vest that emphasized his broad shoulders. His damp hair was combed back from his forehead, revealing more of his face than the hat had earlier in the day. "Evening, everyone," he said, taking his place at the head of the table. "Looks like Esther's outdone herself again." There was a general murmur of agreement as everyone took their seats. Margaret sat at the opposite end of the table from her brother, with the ranch foreman, a weathered man named Frank Donnelly, on her right. Zara found herself directed to a seat halfway down the table, between Esther and a quiet cowboy introduced as Samuel. Grace was said, and then the meal began in earnest, with platters and bowls being passed around the table. The conversation flowed easily, focusing mainly on the upcoming roundup and the condition of the herd after the harsh winter. Zara ate quietly, observing the dynamics around her. Despite being the owner and boss, Colton seemed to have an easy rapport with his men. They respected him, that much was clear, but there was none of the fearful deference she had sometimes seen ranch hands show to their employers. Occasionally, she would glance up to find Colton's blue eyes on her, a thoughtful expression on his face. Each time, he would quickly look away, returning his attention to his food or responding to a question from one of the men. After the meal, as the men filed out to enjoy pipes or cigarettes on the porch before turning in, Colton approached Zara as she helped clear the table. "Mrs. Abbott," he said, his voice low enough that only she could hear, "I hope you're finding everything to your satisfaction." "Yes, Mr. Prescott, everyone has been very kind," she replied, balancing a stack of plates. "Good." He seemed about to say something more, then changed his mind. "If you need anything, don't hesitate to ask Margaret or myself." "Thank you. I appreciate your generosity more than I can express." He nodded, a flicker of something discomfort perhaps, crossing his features. "No need for thanks. You'll earn your keep, I'm sure." With that, he turned and strode out of the dining room, leaving Zara to wonder about the complex man who had rescued her from a fate too terrible to contemplate. Later that night, as she lay in her new bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the ranch settling for the night, Zara found herself thinking about Thomas. They had been childhood sweethearts back in Illinois, marrying young and heading west with dreams of building a life together on the frontier. For 5 years they had worked side by side, turning a raw piece of land into a modest but productive farm. They had been happy, despite the hardships, secure in their love for each other. Then came the winter that took him from her, and with him, all their dreams. "I miss you," she whispered into the darkness. "But I think you would approve of where I've landed. It's a chance, Thomas. A chance to start again." With that thought providing some comfort, Zara closed her eyes and fell into the first peaceful sleep she'd had in months. The next few weeks passed in a blur of activity as Zara settled into her role at the Lazy Pea. Spring roundup kept the cowboys busy from dawn until dusk, while the women of the household worked equally hard to keep everyone fed and the ranch running smoothly. Zara's duties were varied and constant. She assisted Esther in the kitchen, helped Beatrice with the never-ending laundry, and took on much of the cleaning of the main house. She also found herself increasingly responsible for organizing supplies, managing the pantry inventory, and even keeping some of the household accounts under Margaret's supervision. Margaret proved to be a fair but exacting taskmaster, with high expectations but also a willingness to teach. She seemed pleased with Zara's quick mind and attention to detail, and gradually entrusted her with more responsibility. "You have a good head for figures," Margaret observed one afternoon as they reviewed the household ledger together. "That's a useful skill out here where many can barely sign their names." "My father was a schoolteacher," Zara explained. "He insisted I learn as much as any boy would. A progressive thinker. You were fortunate." "Yes," Zara agreed. "Though he didn't approve when I married Thomas at 18 and headed west. He thought I was throwing away my education." Margaret's expression was understanding. "Love makes us do unexpected things." Something in her tone suggested personal experience, but before Zara could respond, the door opened and Colton entered, bringing with him the smell of dust and horses. "Maggie, have you seen the—" He stopped short upon seeing Zara. "Mrs. Abbott, I didn't mean to interrupt." "Not at all," Zara said, rising from her chair. "We were just finishing the household accounts." "She has quite a talent for bookkeeping," Margaret informed her brother. "I've been thinking she might help with some of the ranch ledgers as well." Colton raised an eyebrow. "Is that so?" "Well, we could certainly use the help, especially with Roundup keeping Frank and me in the saddle most days." Since the night of her arrival, Zara had seen relatively little of Colton Prescott. He left the house before dawn each morning and often returned after she had retired for the night. The few times their paths had crossed, he had been unfailingly polite but distant, addressing her as Mrs. Abbott and keeping their interactions brief and formal. Yet sometimes she would feel his eyes on her during the occasional meal they shared, or notice him watching her from a distance as she hung laundry in the yard or picked vegetables from the kitchen garden. There was something in his gaze that she couldn't quite decipher, a curiosity, perhaps, or something deeper that made her heart beat a little faster despite herself. "I'd be happy to help with the ranch accounts," she said, meeting his eyes steadily. "If you think I could be useful." "I have no doubt of your usefulness, Mrs. Abbott," he replied, his voice gruff but not unkind. "You've already proved your worth to this household." The compliment, unexpected and sincere, brought a flush to Zara's cheeks. "Thank you, Mr. Prescott." An awkward silence fell, broken only when Margaret cleared her throat. "Was there something you needed, Cole?" He blinked, as if remembering his original purpose. "Yes, the map of the North Pasture. I thought it might be in here." "Try the bottom drawer of the desk in the study," Margaret suggested. "I think I saw it there yesterday." With a nod of thanks and a last glance at Zara, Colton departed, leaving behind a faint scent of leather and the outdoors. Margaret watched him go with a thoughtful expression. "My brother is not a man who gives praise lightly," she observed. "You must have impressed him." Zara busied herself with organizing the account books, unsure how to respond. "I'm just doing the job I was hired to do." Was all Margaret said, but there was a speculative gleam in her eye that made Zara both curious and wary. That evening, a spring thunderstorm rolled in from the mountains, bringing with it torrential rain and spectacular lightning that illuminated the ranch in brief, brilliant flashes. After helping serve a hasty supper to the men, many of whom had come in soaked to the skin from their day's work, Zara found herself alone in the kitchen, finishing the last of the washing up while Esther took a well-deserved rest. The back door crashed open and Colton stumbled in, dripping water onto the clean floor. He was breathing hard, his shirt plastered to his chest, his hair a sodden mess. "Mr. Prescott," Zara exclaimed, dropping the dish towel and hurrying to his side. Are you all right? Fine, he managed between breaths. Just had to secure the new foals in the south barn. That roof still leaks like a sieve. Without thinking, Zara took his arm and guided him to a chair by the stove. You're freezing. Let me get you some coffee. She poured a mug of the strong brew that always sat warming on the stove and pressed it into his hands. He accepted it gratefully, his fingers brushing against hers in a brief touch that sent an unexpected shiver up her arm. Thank you, he said, taking a long drink. That helps. Zara fetched a clean towel from the stack of freshly laundered linens and offered it to him. You should dry off before you catch your death. He looked up at her sharply, and Zara realized what she had said, the same words she had spoken to Thomas the night he had come in from checking on their livestock during the blizzard, the night he had first shown symptoms of the pneumonia that would kill him. I'm sorry, she said quickly. I didn't mean to. No need to apologize, Colton interrupted, taking the towel and running it over his face and hair. It's good advice. I've seen too many good men laid low by neglecting their health. Zara moved back to the sink, giving him some privacy as he toweled off as best he could. The kitchen was warm and steamy from the day's cooking, the rain drumming on the roof creating a cozy cocoon that felt removed from the rest of the world. Your husband, Colton said after a moment. He died of pneumonia, didn't he? Zara nodded, not trusting her voice. I'm sorry, Mrs. Abbott. Truly, it's a hard way to lose someone. Thank you, she managed. It was unexpected. He was only 31 and had never been sick a day in his life. Colton was quiet for a moment, sipping his coffee. The war taught me that death doesn't discriminate based on age or previous good health. It takes the strong along with the weak, the young along with the old. You saw a lot of death, I imagine, Zara said softly. More than any man should, he acknowledged, his expression distant. It changes you seeing that much suffering. Zara understood suddenly that this was why he had rescued her from the auction block, not just out of general kindness, but because he had witnessed too much human misery to stand by and watch more if he could prevent it. Is that why you came west after the war? She asked. To leave those memories behind. His eyes refocused on her, surprised at her perception. Partly, and partly because there wasn't much left for me back in Pennsylvania. My parents had died, our family farm had been sold to pay debts, and Maggie was working as a companion to a wealthy widow in Philadelphia. The West offered a fresh start. It seems to have worked out well for you, Zara observed, gesturing to the solid kitchen around them, a small part of the empire he had built. A hint of a smile touched his lips. I've been fortunate, or blessed, as Reverend Taylor would say. The mention of the local preacher reminded Zara of something. Tomorrow's Sunday. Will there be services in town? Weather permitting, Colton confirmed. Maggie usually attends. I'm sure she'd welcome your company if you wish to go. I would like that, Zara said. She had missed the comfort of church during her weeks of uncertainty. Colton drained his coffee cup and stood, the towel draped around his shoulders. I should change into dry clothes. Thank you for the coffee, Mrs. Abbott. You're welcome, Mr. Prescott. He moved toward the door that led to the main part of the house, then paused, turning back to her. Colton, he said. When it's just us, you could call me Colton. Before she could respond, he was gone, leaving Zara staring after him with a curious warmth spreading through her chest that had nothing to do with the heat from the stove. Sunday dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the world clean overnight. Puddles dotted the ranch yard, reflecting the blue sky and white clouds like scattered mirrors. Zara, dressed in her best dress, one of her own that Margaret had kindly taken in to fit her diminished frame, and pinned her hair up with extra care. After a light breakfast, she joined Margaret in the buckboard for the 5-mile journey to Redemption Creek. It was Zara's first time back in town since the day of the auction, and she felt a flutter of anxiety as they approached the cluster of buildings that made up the small settlement. Nervous? Margaret asked perceptively as they neared the outskirts of town. A little, Zara admitted. The last time I was here wasn't my finest moment. Margaret's expression was sympathetic but practical. Hold your head high, Zara. You've done nothing wrong, and you're under the protection of the Lazy P now. That means something in these parts. The small white church stood at the far end of the main street, its spire gleaming in the morning sun. As they pulled up, several other wagons and horses were already gathered outside, with townspeople in their Sunday best greeting each other on the steps. Margaret handled the reins with practiced ease, bringing the buckboard to a stop beside a hitching post. A young ranch hand who had ridden in ahead of them hurried over to help them down and secure the horses. "Thank you, Peter," Margaret said. "We'll be ready to return after the social hour." As they walked toward the church, Zara was acutely aware of the curious glances and whispers that followed them. Word of her situation and Colton's intervention had clearly spread throughout the community. "Mrs. Prescott." "How lovely to see you," called a plump woman in a purple dress that strained at the seams. "And this must be the young woman your brother rescued. How charitable of him." Margaret's smile remained fixed, but Zara could sense her irritation. "Mrs. Whitmore, may I present Mrs. Zara Abbott, who has joined our household staff. Zara, this is Mrs. Eliza Whitmore, wife of our local banker." Zara's spine stiffened at the introduction to the wife of the man who had foreclosed on her farm and arranged for her to be sold at auction. Nevertheless, she managed a polite nod. "Mrs. Whitmore." The banker's wife examined Zara with undisguised curiosity. "Such a tragedy about your husband, my dear, and then those unfortunate debts. But how fortunate that Mr. Prescott took an interest in your situation." Before Zara could formulate a response that wouldn't involve telling Mrs. Whitmore exactly what she thought of her husband's business practices, a tall man in clerical garb approached. "Margaret, it's good to see you," he said warmly, taking her hand. His kind eyes turned to Zara. "And you must be Mrs. Abbott. I'm Reverend Taylor. Welcome to our congregation." "Thank you, Reverend," Zara replied, grateful for his intervention. "I was just telling Mrs. Abbott how generous Mr. Prescott was to take her in," Mrs. Whitmore persisted. So unlike him to involve himself in such matters. One wonders at his motivation. Margaret's smile became decidedly frosty. "My brother has always had a strong sense of justice, Mrs. Whitmore. Now, if you'll excuse us, I believe the service is about to begin." She steered Zara toward the church entrance, leaving the banker's wife looking somewhat affronted. "Pay her no mind," Margaret murmured as they found seats in a pew near the back. "Eliza Whitmore has nothing better to do than speculate about other people's business." What did she mean about it being unlike your brother to involve himself in such matters? Zara couldn't help asking. Margaret sighed. "Colton tends to keep to himself. He's respected in these parts but not particularly sociable. And while he's known for fair dealing and helping neighbors in genuine need, he doesn't usually. Well, he's never brought home a woman before, employee or otherwise." Before Zara could process this information, the organ began to play, signaling the start of the service. She rose with the rest of the congregation, pushing aside her questions to focus on the familiar comfort of worship. Reverend Taylor's sermon was on the Good Samaritan, a choice that seemed pointed given recent events. Zara couldn't help but draw parallels between the biblical story and her own rescue by Colton Prescott. Like the traveler in the parable, she had been at her lowest moment when help came from an unexpected source. After the service, there was a social hour in the church hall, with coffee, tea, and baked goods provided by the ladies of the congregation. Zara found herself the object of much curiosity, with various townspeople finding excuses to introduce themselves and subtly, or not so subtly, inquire about her circumstances. She handled the questions with as much grace as she could muster, aware that in a small community like Redemption Creek, she would be a topic of interest until something more exciting came along. During a brief moment alone by the refreshment table, she overheard two women talking nearby, clearly unaware of her presence just around the corner. "Well, I think it's scandalous," one was saying. "A single man bringing a young widow into his home, no matter what he calls her position." "Now Harriet Margaret Prescott is there as chaperone," the other replied. "And everyone knows Colton Prescott is a man of honor." "Honor or not, men have needs," the first woman insisted. "And that Abbott woman is pretty enough despite being thin as a rail. Mark my words, she's warming more than his coffee." Zara's cheeks burned with humiliation and anger. Before she could decide whether to confront the gossips or retreat, Margaret appeared at her side. "Ready to leave?" she asked, taking in Zara's flushed face with a shrewd glance. "I see you've discovered one of the less appealing aspects of small-town life. The speed at which rumors spread," Zara asked bitterly. "And the creativity with which they are embellished," Margaret confirmed. "Best not to give it any mind. Those with nothing better to do will always find something to talk about." They made their farewells and departed, both women silent as the buckboard carried them away from town and back toward the Lazy P. The spring sunshine had warmed the day considerably, and Zara untied her bonnet, letting it hang down her back by its ribbons. "Does it bother you?" she finally asked. "What they're saying about your brother and me?" Margaret considered this for a moment. "Not for my sake, no. I've lived in this territory long enough to develop a thick skin. But I worry about how it affects you, especially after everything you've been through. And your brother, would he be disturbed to know what people are saying?" A small smile played at the corners of Margaret's mouth. "Colton has never cared much for public opinion. He'd be more concerned about how it affects you than himself." That matched what Zara had observed of Colton's character, but it was reassuring to have it confirmed. "He's a good man, isn't he?" "One of the best," Margaret agreed. "Though not without his flaws, like any of us. He can be stubborn as a mule, too quick to take on burdens alone, and he broods more than is healthy." Her expression softened. "But he has the kindest heart of anyone I know, even if he tries to hide it under that gruff exterior." They rode in companionable silence for a while, the rhythmic clip-clop of the horses' hooves and the creak of the wagon wheels the only sounds. The Wyoming landscape stretched around them, vast and beautiful, with the distant mountains etched against the blue sky. "He was engaged once, you know," Margaret said suddenly, "before the war, to a girl from our hometown in Pennsylvania. Caroline was her name." Zara tried to hide her surprise at this unexpected confidence. "What happened?" She couldn't wait. "He was gone for 4 years, and letters were irregular at best. By the time he returned, she had married a man who had purchased an exemption from military service and made a fortune supplying the army." "That must have been devastating for him," Zara said softly, thinking of the young Colton returning from the horrors of war only to find his future stolen. Margaret nodded. "It changed him. He was always serious, but there was a lightness to him before, a readiness to laugh. That disappeared. Sometimes I think that's partly why he came west, not just for a fresh start, but to put as much distance as possible between himself and those memories." "And he's never found anyone else?" Zara asked, then immediately felt intrusive. "I'm sorry, that's none of my business." "It's a natural question," Margaret assured her. "And no, he hasn't. There have been women who were interested, of course. As Mrs. Whitmore pointed out, my brother is a successful rancher with considerable property, but he's kept his heart carefully guarded. They had reached the turnoff to the Lazy P, the ranch buildings visible in the distance. Margaret slowed the horses, turning to look directly at Zara. "I'm telling you this because I've seen the way he looks at you when he thinks no one is watching," she said quietly. "And because I've seen the way you sometimes look at him." Zara's pulse quickened. "Margaret, you don't need to explain anything to me," Margaret interrupted gently. "You're both adults and your heart is your own to give or withhold as you choose. I just want you to understand that if Colton ever does let down those walls he's built, it would be a rare and precious thing, and not to be taken lightly." With that, she clicked to the horses, urging them forward again, leaving Zara to contemplate her words as the Lazy P grew larger on the horizon. The weeks slipped by, turning spring into early summer. The roundup was completed successfully, with the Lazy Pticus herd showing good numbers despite the harsh winter. New calves frolicked in the pastures, their playful antics bringing smiles to even the most weather-beaten cowboys. Zara settled more deeply into life at the ranch, her position evolving beyond mere household help. With her organizational skills and head for figures, she had indeed taken on some of the ranch accounting, working in the study several afternoons a week with ledgers spread around her. She had also begun to assist Margaret with correspondence, writing letters to suppliers, arranging shipments, and handling some of the social obligations that came with the Prescott's position in the community. Her education, once deemed superfluous for a farmer's wife, was now serving her well. As her duties changed, so too did her relationship with the household. No longer just a hired hand, she occupied a somewhat ambiguous position, not quite family, but more than servant. She took most meals with Margaret and Colton in the dining room rather than in the kitchen with Esther and Beatrice, and she was included in discussions about ranch operations. And then there was Colton himself. Since their conversation in the kitchen the night of the storm, something had shifted between them. He sought her company more frequently, finding reasons to be in the study while she worked on the accounts or lingering at the table after dinner to discuss books or current events. He was different in these private moments, more relaxed, occasionally even revealing a dry sense of humor that surprised and delighted her. She learned that he was well-read, with a particular interest in history and philosophy, subjects they often discussed late into the evening. For Zara, these conversations were a lifeline, awakening parts of herself that had been dormant during her years of hard work on the farm. Thomas had been a good man and a loving husband, but his interests had been practical rather than intellectual. With Colton, she found herself engaging in debates and discussions that stimulated her mind and made her feel truly alive. Yet there remained a careful distance between them, an invisible boundary that neither seemed willing to cross. He never touched her, even accidentally, and always addressed her as Mrs. Abbott, though she had finally begun calling him Colton in private, as he had requested. Zara told herself this was as it should be. She was still in mourning for Thomas, still wearing her wedding band, still his widow. And Colton was her employer, a man who had rescued her from a terrible fate, but to whom she owed a professional loyalty, not a personal one. If sometimes she found herself watching him when he wasn't looking, admiring the strong line of his jaw or the way his hands moved with confident precision, well, that was a private weakness she would overcome in time. One afternoon in late June, Zara was in the study organizing receipts when Colton entered, his expression troubled. "Is something wrong?" she asked, immediately concerned. He hesitated, then sighed. "Frank just brought news from town. There's been an incident at the bank." Zara's stomach tightened. What kind of incident? It seems Harold Whitmore has been engaging in some questionable practices. The territorial bank examiner arrived unannounced yesterday and found discrepancies in the accounts. Colton ran a hand through his hair, a gesture she had come to recognize as a sign of agitation. Several customers have lost significant deposits, including some of the smaller ranchers and farmers in the area. That's terrible, Zara said, thinking of the hard-working people who would be devastated by such losses. Then a thought struck her. The lazy PTKS accounts are safe, Colton assured her. We do most of our banking in Cheyenne these days, after I had some disagreements with Whitmore's policies years ago. Relief flooded through her, followed quickly by a darker thought. My husband's debts, she said slowly. The ones that led to our farm being foreclosed and me being. She couldn't bring herself to say sold. Colton's eyes sharpened. You're wondering if they were legitimate. Yes, Zara admitted. Thomas was careful with money. He wouldn't have borrowed more than he could repay. I was shocked when Mr. Whitmore claimed we owed so much. Colton's expression hardened. If Whitmore falsified your husband's debts to seize your property, that's criminal. But how would we prove it? All the loan documents are in his possession. Leave that to me, Colton said, a determined look settling over his features. I have some connections in the territorial government, and this bank examiner owes me a favor from years back. The idea that Thomas might have been cheated, that their farm might have been taken illegally, and that her subsequent humiliation might have been based on fraud filled Zara with a mixture of hope and fury. If it's true, she said, her voice shaking slightly, I want my land back. Colton studied her for a long moment. Is that what you want? To return to your farm? The question caught her off guard. In the weeks since coming to the Lazy P, she had thought of her former home with nostalgia but not with any concrete plans to return. Life here had become comfortable. More than comfortable. I don't know, she admitted, but I want the choice to be mine, not taken from me through deceit. Colton nodded, seemingly satisfied with this answer. That's fair. I'll ride into town tomorrow and see what I can find out. He turned to leave, then paused at the door. Whatever happens, Mrs. Abbott, you'll always have a place here if you want it. The sincerity in his voice made her throat tighten with emotion. Thank you, Colton. After he left, Zara sat motionless at the desk, her mind whirling with possibilities. If Thomas's debts had been falsified, if their farm had been wrongfully taken, what would that mean for her future? The life she had built at the Lazy P over the past months had become precious to her in ways she hadn't fully acknowledged until now. And what of her growing feelings for Colton Prescott? Feelings she had tried to deny, but which were becoming increasingly difficult to ignore. That evening at supper, Colton announced his intentions to ride into town the next day to the assembled household. I'd like to accompany you, Zara said, surprising herself with her boldness. If there's any possibility my husband was wronged, I want to be there to face Mr. Whitmore. Colton frowned slightly. It might not be pleasant, Mrs. Abbott. Whitmore won't take kindly to being questioned. Nevertheless, it's my right, she insisted. Thomas would have done the same for me. After a moment's consideration, Colton nodded. Very well, we'll leave after breakfast. Margaret, who had been listening to this exchange with interest, spoke up. Take the carriage rather than riding, Cole. It's more appropriate if Mrs. Abbott is accompanying you. The next morning dawned clear and warm, promising another beautiful summer day. Zara dressed with particular care in her best day dress, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and a matching bonnet. She pinned her hair in a neat chignon, and after a moment's hesitation, removed her wedding band for the first time since Thomas's death, placing it carefully in a small box on her dresser. It wasn't that she was forgetting Thomas or dishonoring his memory. But if she was to face Harold Whitmore as Zara Abbott in her own right, rather than as Thomas Abbott's widow, she needed to do so with nothing holding her back. When she descended the stairs, Colton was waiting in the foyer, dressed in what she recognized as his business attire, a dark suit that emphasized his broad shoulders, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He looked handsome and imposing, every inch the successful rancher. His eyes widened slightly when he saw her, a flicker of appreciation quickly masked. "You look very nice, Mrs. Abbott." "Thank you," she replied, noting that he seemed to have taken extra care with his appearance as well. "As do you." The drive to town was pleasant, with the summer landscape in full bloom around them. They spoke little, each lost in their own thoughts about what the day might bring. As they approached Redemption Creek, Zara felt a knot of tension form in her stomach, but she straightened her spine, determined to face whatever came with dignity. The bank was a solid brick building in the center of town, its facade designed to inspire confidence and suggest permanence. As Colton helped Zara down from the carriage, she noticed several people gathered outside, their expressions ranging from worried to angry. "Looks like news of the irregularities has spread," Colton observed, offering Zara his arm. "Stay close to me." She placed her hand on his arm, drawing strength from his solid presence as they made their way through the small crowd and into the bank. Inside, the atmosphere was tense, with several customers engaged in heated discussions with the tellers. Harold Whitmore himself was visible through the open door of his office, deep in conversation with a stern-looking man in a suit who Zara guessed must be the bank examiner. When Whitmore spotted Colton and Zara, his face paled visibly. "Mr. Prescott," he said, quickly coming out to greet them with forced joviality. "What brings you to our establishment today? I thought you did your banking in Cheyenne these days." "I do," Colton confirmed coolly. "I'm here on behalf of Mrs. Abbott." Whitmore's gaze shifted to Zara, and she saw a flash of discomfort cross his features. "Mrs. Abbott, I trust you're well." "I am, Mr. Whitmore," she replied, keeping her voice steady despite the anger simmering just below the surface. "Though I find myself with some questions about my late husband's accounts." The banker's discomfort visibly increased. "Perhaps we should discuss this in my office. Mr. Fletcher, the bank examiner, is with me at the moment, but—" "Perfect," Colton interrupted. "I'm sure Mr. Fletcher will be interested in our discussion as well." Without waiting for a response, he guided Zara toward the office, leaving Whitmore little choice but to follow. The bank examiner looked up as they entered, his expression curious. "Harold, who are these people?" he asked. "Martin Fletcher. This is Colton Prescott, owner of the Lazy P Ranch, and Mrs. Zara Abbott, a widow whose farm was foreclosed upon earlier this year," Whitmore said, his voice strained. "Mr. Prescott," Fletcher said, recognition dawning in his eyes. "I believe we met at the governor's reception in Cheyenne last fall." "We did," Colton confirmed. "And I'm glad to find you here today, as Mrs. Abbott has some concerns about the circumstances surrounding her husband's debts and the subsequent foreclosure of their property." Fletcher's interest was immediately piqued. "Is that so? Please sit down, Mrs. Abbott, and tell me about these concerns." For the next hour, Zara laid out her story: Thomas's sudden death, the surprising revelation of debts she hadn't known existed, the foreclosure that had left her destitute, and finally, the auction where Colton had intervened. As she spoke, Whitmore grew increasingly agitated while Fletcher took detailed notes. "You have any documentation regarding these loans, Mrs. Abbott?" Fletcher asked when she had finished. "No," she admitted. "Everything was seized along with the property." Mr. Whitmore claimed the original loan documents were kept here at the bank. All eyes turned to the banker, who was now sweating profusely despite the coolness of the office. "I would need to check our files," he stammered. "It was some time ago." "I think you should do that," Fletcher said firmly. "Now." Whitmore reluctantly moved to a large filing cabinet and began rifling through it, his hands shaking visibly. After several minutes of searching, he turned back with a thin folder. "Here it is, the Abbott account." Fletcher took the folder and examined its contents, his frown deepening as he read. "Mr. Whitmore, according to these documents, Thomas Abbott took out a loan of $500 3 years ago, with the farm as collateral. It appears he made regular payments until his death, at which point there was a balance of just over $100 remaining." "That sounds right," Zara confirmed. "We borrowed to purchase additional livestock after a difficult season." "Yet you claimed the debt was over $1,000 at the time of foreclosure," Fletcher continued, looking at Whitmore. "And these payment records appear to have been altered quite clumsily." The banker's face had gone from pale to ashen. "There must be some mistake." "I don't think so," Fletcher said coldly. "This is consistent with other irregularities I've found in your accounts, Mr. Whitmore. It appears you've been systematically falsifying debts to seize properties, then selling them at a profit to your associates." Zara felt a wave of vindication wash over her, followed quickly by renewed anger. "You stole my farm," she said, her voice low but intense. "You took everything Thomas and I had built together, and when that wasn't enough, you tried to sell me like property." Whitmore had no response, his eyes darting around the room as if seeking escape. Colton, who had remained silent during much of the exchange, finally spoke. "Mr. Fletcher, what happens now?" The bank examiner closed the folder with a decisive snap. "The bank will be placed under territorial control pending a full investigation. Assets will be frozen, and any properties improperly seized will be returned to their rightful owners." He looked at Zara with genuine sympathy. "That includes your farm, Mrs. Abbott. Though I'm afraid the livestock and personal possessions that were sold at auction may be more difficult to recover." "The land is what matters most," Zara said, a strange mixture of emotions swirling within her. Relief at the vindication, joy at the thought of reclaiming the home she and Thomas had loved, and yet an unexpected reluctance at the idea of leaving the Lazy P and all it had come to mean to her. As they left the bank, word of what had happened spread quickly through the small crowd still gathered outside. Several people approached Zara, offering congratulations and sharing their own stories of dealing with Whitmore's duplicity. It seemed she was not the only one who had been wronged by the banker. When they finally made their way back to the carriage, Zara felt drained but somehow lighter, as if a burden she hadn't fully acknowledged had been lifted from her shoulders. "Are you all right?" Colton asked as he helped her up onto the seat. "Yes," she said, though in truth she was uncertain. "It's just a lot to take in." He nodded, climbing up beside her and taking the reins. "We can talk more on the way back to the ranch, or not if you prefer to think." "Thank you," she said softly. "For everything. Not just today, but from the beginning. I don't know what would have happened to me if you hadn't been there that day." His hands tightened on the reins. "I'm glad I was." They drove in silence for a while, each absorbed in their own thoughts. The countryside seemed especially beautiful to Zara today, the rolling hills and distant mountains a reminder of the freedom and possibilities that stretched before her. "Will you go back?" Colton finally asked, his voice carefully neutral. "To your farm?" It was the question Zara had been asking herself since the moment Fletcher had confirmed that the property could be returned to her. The farm represented her life with Thomas, the dreams they had shared, the future they had planned together. But that future had died with him, and she was a different woman now than she had been then. "I don't know," she admitted. Part of me wants to. It's the last connection I have to Thomas, to the life we built together. But another part. She trailed off, unable to articulate the complex feelings that had been growing within her over the past months. How could she explain that while she would always love Thomas and cherish their time together, her heart had begun to heal in ways she hadn't thought possible? That she had begun to imagine a different future, one that included the tall, serious man sitting beside her. "You don't have to decide right away," Colton said into the silence. "The farm will still be there when you're ready." His consideration touched her deeply. "What would you do?" "If you were in my position," he considered this for a long moment, his profile strong against the backdrop of the summer sky. "I believe in honoring the past," he said finally, "but not at the expense of the future. Thomas would want you to be happy, wherever that happiness might be found." It was exactly what Zara needed to hear, though she hadn't known it until he spoke the words. Thomas had loved her, deeply and truly. He would not have wanted her to cling to a ghost, to live in the shadow of what had been rather than embracing what could be. "Thank you," she said again, the words inadequate for the gratitude she felt. As they approached the Lazy P, the familiar buildings coming into view against the backdrop of the mountains, Zara felt a sense of homecoming that was both surprising and not. In the months since Colton had brought her here, this place had worked its way into her heart, becoming more than just a refuge or a workplace. "Whatever you decide," Colton said as they pulled up in front of the main house, "know that you'll always have a place here, not as an employee but as someone who belongs." The significance of his words wasn't lost on Zara. For the first time, he was acknowledging that what had grown between them might be more than a professional relationship or even a friendship. Before she could respond, Margaret emerged from the house, clearly having been watching for their return. "There you are. How did it go?" The moment for private conversation had passed. But as Colton helped Zara down from the carriage, their hands lingered together a moment longer than necessary, a silent promise of more to come. That evening, after recounting the day's events to an outraged Margaret and a sympathetic Esther, Zara retreated to her room earlier than usual, claiming fatigue. In truth, she needed time alone to think, to sort through the tumult of emotions and possibilities that lay before her. She sat at the small desk by the window, looking out at the starlit expanse of the ranch. In the distance, she could see the lights of the bunkhouse where the Cowboys would be playing cards or swapping stories before turning in. Closer, the soft glow from the study window indicated that Colton was still up, perhaps catching up on the work he had set aside to accompany her to town. On the desk before her lay a blank sheet of paper. She had thought to make a list of pros and cons, a practical approach to the decision that faced her. But instead, she found herself writing a letter to Thomas. "My dearest Thomas, today I learned that our farm was taken wrongfully and that it can be returned to me. I should be overjoyed, and part of me is. It was our dream, the future we planned together. But you are gone, my love, and I remain. These past months have taught me that life continues, that grief, while never truly gone, can soften enough to allow new joy to enter. I have found a place here, work that uses my mind as well as my hands, people who have become dear to me. And I have found a man who sees me not as I was, but as I am now, stronger for having survived loss, wiser for having faced hardship. I will always love you. You were my first love, my youth, my beginning. But I think perhaps you would want me to find my middle, my continuation. To build something new that honors what we had without being limited by it. I need to know that you would understand. That you would give me your blessing to follow my heart, wherever it may lead. Forever yours in memory." Zara, she folded the letter carefully and placed it in the small box where she had put her wedding band that morning. It would never be sent, never be read by its intended recipient. But writing it had clarified her thoughts in a way that no list could have done. Thomas was her past, a cherished past that had shaped her into the woman she was today. But Colton could be her future if she was brave enough to reach for it. With that thought providing a sense of peace she hadn't felt in months, Zara prepared for bed, knowing that when morning came, she would be ready to make her decision. The next day dawned with a clarity that matched Zara's newfound resolve. After breakfast, she sought out Colton, finding him in the stables where he was discussing the day's work with Frank, the ranch foreman. "Excuse me," she said, approaching the two men. "Colton, might I have a word when you're not busy?" Frank, a perceptive man despite his gruff exterior, quickly made himself scarce, muttering something about checking on the new foals. Colton turned to Zara, his expression curious. "Of course, is everything all right?" "Yes," she assured him. "I've just made a decision about the farm and I wanted to discuss it with you first." A flicker of something apprehension, crossed his features. "I see. Would you like to walk? It's a fine morning." They strolled away from the main buildings, following a path that led down to the river that formed the eastern boundary of the ranch. The summer sun was warm on their shoulders, but a gentle breeze kept the heat from being oppressive. "I've decided not to return to the farm," Zara said when they reached a bend in the river where a large cottonwood tree provided dappled shade. "At least, not to live." Colton's step faltered slightly, the only indication of his surprise. "May I ask why?" Zara took a deep breath, gathering her courage. "Because my life is here now. My future is here." She turned to face him fully, meeting his eyes with a steadiness that belied the nervous fluttering in her stomach. "That day on the auction block when you said I was yours forever. It wasn't true then. It couldn't be. I belonged to grief, to the past, to memories." Colton remained silent, but his intense gaze never left her face, encouraging her to continue. "But now, if you meant those words in the way I've come to hope you did, they could be true, if you wanted them to be." For a moment, the only sounds were the murmur of the river and the rustling of leaves overhead. Then Colton took a step closer, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, the slight tremble in his hands as he reached for hers. "Zara," he said, her name on his lips a revelation. It was the first time he had called her by her given name alone, without the formality of Mrs. Abbott to keep a distance between them. "I've wanted them to be true since the moment I saw you. Even then," she asked, hardly daring to believe it, "when I was just a desperate widow on an auction block." "Not just a widow," he corrected gently. "A woman of extraordinary courage facing an impossible situation with dignity. I admired you before I knew you. And once I did know you, your intelligence, your kindness, your strength, admiration became something much deeper." He lifted one hand to touch her cheek, a feather-light caress that sent warmth spreading through her. "I love you, Zara Abbott. I have for some time now. But I didn't think I had the right to say so, not when your heart was still healing, not when you were dependent on me for your livelihood." Tears pricked at the corners of Zara's eyes, but they were tears of joy, not sorrow. "And now you have choices," he said simply. "You could return to your farm. You could seek employment elsewhere with the references Margaret and I would gladly provide. You're no longer at my mercy, which means if you choose to stay, it will be because you want to, not because you have to." The understanding in his words, the respect he showed for her autonomy even in his declaration of love, confirmed what Zara already knew, that this was a man worthy of her heart. "I choose to stay," she said, her voice clear and certain. "I choose you, Colton Prescott. I love you." The smile that transformed his face was like the sun breaking through clouds, brilliant and warming. He gathered her into his arms with a gentleness that belied his strength. And when his lips found hers, Zara knew she had found home in a way that had nothing to do with property or land. The kiss deepened, a promise and a beginning all at once. When they finally drew apart, both a little breathless, Colton rested his forehead against hers. "Marry me," he said, the words somewhere between a question and a declaration. "Be my wife, my partner in everything. Share this land, this life with me." "Yes," Zara answered without hesitation. "Yes, I will marry you." They returned to the ranch hand in hand, their joy evident in their faces. Margaret took one look at them and smiled, her eyes suspiciously bright. "It's about time," was all she said, embracing them both. Word spread quickly through the household and then to the ranch hands. By supper time, everyone was raising glasses in a toast to the boss and his bride-to-be. Esther outdid herself with a celebratory meal, and even the most stoic cowboys offered congratulations. That night, standing on the porch under a canopy of stars, Zara leaned against Colton's solid warmth and marveled at the turns her life had taken. "What will we do with the farm?" she asked, practical even in her happiness. "I don't want to sell it, not after fighting to get it back." Colton considered this, his arm secure around her waist. "We could lease it to a family looking for a start like you and Thomas were, give someone else a chance to build their dream." The suggestion was so perfectly right, so in keeping with both honoring her past and creating a better future, that Zara felt a fresh wave of love for this man who understood her so well. "That's perfect," she agreed. "Thomas would approve." "I hope so," Colton said seriously. "I know I can never replace him in your heart, nor would I want to. He'll always be a part of who you are." Zara turned in his arms, looking up at the face that had become so dear to her. "There's room in a heart for more than one love," she assured him. "Different but no less true." His kiss was gentle, reverent, a promise of the life they would build together. They were married 2 weeks later in the church in Redemption Creek, with Margaret standing up for Zara and Frank serving as Colton's best man. The entire household staff and all the ranch hands attended, along with most of the town. Notably absent was Harold Whitmore, who was awaiting trial in Cheyenne for his banking crimes. His wife, however, was present, having apologized profusely to Zara for her husband's actions and her own unkind speculations. Reverend Taylor performed the ceremony with evident pleasure, pronouncing them husband and wife with a broad smile. When Colton kissed his bride, the cheers from the assembled guests nearly raised the roof. The celebration continued back at the Lazy P, with tables set up in the yard and music provided by several cowboys who proved surprisingly talented with fiddles and harmonicas. As the sun began to set, casting golden light across the land they now shared, Colton led Zara in a dance, holding her close as they swayed to a sweet, simple melody. "Happy?" he asked, his voice low and intimate despite the crowd around them. "More than I ever thought possible again," she answered truthfully. "And you?" "I have everything I never knew I wanted," he said, the love in his eyes making her heart swell. "A woman of extraordinary courage and kindness, a partner for all my days. What more could a man ask for?" In the years that followed, the Lazy P flourished under their joint stewardship. Colton's business acumen combined with Zara's organizational skills made them a formidable team. They leased the Abbott farm to a young couple with 3 small children, providing guidance and support as the family established themselves. Margaret remained at the ranch, delighted when, a year after the wedding, she became an aunt to a healthy baby boy they named Thomas Colton Prescott. A daughter, Elizabeth Margaret, followed 2 years later, and the house rang with children's laughter. On the 5th anniversary of their wedding, Colton and Zara stood on the porch of the main house, watching the sunset paint the Wyoming sky in shades of gold and crimson. Their children played nearby under Margaret's watchful eye, their happy shrieks a counterpoint to the evening chorus of birds. "You ever think about that day?" Colton asked, his arm around his wife's shoulders. "The auction." Zara considered this, leaning into his embrace. "Sometimes. Not with the pain it once held, but as the beginning of this journey." She looked up at him, at the face that had become as familiar to her as her own, at the gray now threading through his dark hair at the temples. "You said I was yours forever that day. I didn't believe it then. And now?" he asked, his eyes crinkling at the corners as he smiled down at her. "Now I know it's true," she said simply. "Not because you claimed me, but because I chose you. We chose each other." Colton's kiss was as tender as their first, a reaffirmation of the love that had grown between them, a love born in the unlikeliest of circumstances but no less profound for it. "Forever," he murmured against her lips. "That's a promise I intend to keep." And as the sun sank below the horizon, painting the land in the golden light of promise, Zara knew with absolute certainty that the auction block that had once been the site of her greatest humiliation had, through a twist of fate and the kindness of a good man, become the foundation of her greatest joy. For in losing everything, she had found something far more precious, a love that would indeed last forever.